No one dared touch the alien princess until she took the human's hand. HFY Sci-Fi Story. In the heart of the vast galaxy, the Xiathar Empire stood as a powerful and ancient civilization. Its floating cities shimmered in the stars, and its people, known for their intelligence and advanced technology, held sway over many other worlds. The royal family of Xiathar had ruled for millennia, their bloodline unbroken and revered. But the empire, once proud and strong, now faced an uncertain future. Princess Lyxara was the last of her line, a brilliant and powerful ruler in waiting. She was known across the galaxy not just for her beauty, but for her unmatched psionic abilities. Her mind could control the elements, read the thoughts of others, and even influence their emotions. She was a goddess to some, a weapon to others, and a prisoner to herself. Lyxara's life was one of constant surveillance, her every move watched by the Celestial Guard, the most elite warriors of the Xiathar Empire. They were sworn to protect her, but their loyalty was cold and calculated. To them she was a symbol, a piece on the grand chessboard of galactic politics. No one dared approach her unless ordered. No one dared touch her. That was the way of the Empire. But Lyxara had known loneliness for many years. Her power, her psionics, had become a curse, driving away those who might have loved her. Even the nobles of the court were cautious around her, too afraid to approach the princess, too aware of the power she could unleash with a single thought. She had learned to keep herself distant from others, keeping her emotions tightly controlled and her desires hidden deep within. In the royal palace of Xiathar, the nobles plotted, whispered, and schemed. A delicate balance of power existed among the various factions, each one eager to gain control of the throne. But with Lyxara being the last of the royal bloodline, none of the factions had been able to claim her. Yet, the tension was thick in the air as Lyxara entered the grand hall to meet the latest of her supposed protectors. The Council of Nobles had arranged for a human officer from Earth to be assigned to her as part of a diplomatic agreement between the Galactic Coalition and Xiathar. The humans had always been an unpredictable but valuable ally. Their technological advances and military expertise were well respected throughout the galaxy. Yet they were also outsiders, their ways strange and unfamiliar. Lyxara's first impression of Commander Jackson Kane was not one of awe or fear as she had expected. Instead, there was something different about him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the sharp eyes of a soldier who had seen countless battles. His face was hard, but there was a quiet strength in his posture, something that caught her attention. And yet, there was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation as he looked directly at her. The council had warned Jackson to tread carefully. Lyxara was known to be a volatile presence, and many had suggested he keep his distance. But Jackson had never been one to follow rules that didn't make sense. He had been a soldier for too long to be intimidated by anyone, even if they were a princess with godlike powers. Commander Kane, Lyxara's voice echoed in the hall, cool and composed. I trust your arrival was uneventful, Jackson nodded. As uneventful as space travel can be, Your Highness. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and he caught the subtle flicker of amusement in her gaze. It was a small thing, but it intrigued him. In his experience, royalty rarely showed such openness, even if it was just for a moment. Lyxara tilted her head, studying him for a moment longer. There was something about Jackson that didn't fit the mold of the other officers and diplomats she had encountered. Most were intimidated by her power, keeping their distance, unwilling to challenge her. But Jackson was different. He wasn't afraid. And that unsettled her in a way she hadn't expected. I trust you know your duties, she said, her voice steady. I do, Your Highness, Jackson replied. I'm here to protect you, just as I would any other member of the Galactic Coalition. Lyxara's gaze sharpened at his words. You may find that your duty here is not so simple, Commander. I am not just another person to protect. I am the last of my bloodline, the last hope of the Xiothar Empire. Jackson didn't flinch. I understand the importance of your position, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm here to keep you safe. And if that means standing between you and your enemies, then that's what I'll do. For a moment, the two stood there, staring at each other. It was a quiet standoff, but one filled with unspoken tension. Lyxara's psionics flickered at the edges of her mind, but she kept them in check. She had learned long ago that displaying her power was both a blessing and a curse. The moment she revealed too much, the game would change, and she would become a weapon instead of a ruler. But there was something about this human, something different that made her want to test the boundaries. For once, she wondered if it was possible to connect with another being, even if that meant stepping outside her own carefully controlled world. Perhaps you'll find your task here more challenging than you anticipate, Lyxara said, her voice softer now but with a hint of something else, curiosity perhaps or something more. Jackson met her gaze. I've faced worse challenges. I'm not afraid of the unknown. Lyxara studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching for any sign of weakness, any crack in his resolve. But there was nothing. He was completely unfazed, a man who had clearly seen battle and was not easily shaken. You'll need more than courage to survive in this palace, she said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. The politics here are deadly, and you'll have enemies on all sides. I'm not here to play politics, Jackson said with a small grin. I'm here to keep you alive. Lyxara raised an eyebrow at him. Alive? Is that all? I thought you were here to protect the throne. Jackson's smile faded, and he met her gaze with a look that was almost too intense. Protecting the throne means nothing if the person on it is dead. Lyxara's heart skipped a beat, though she quickly masked the reaction. She had not expected such blunt honesty, especially from someone so new to this world of court intrigue. It was a reminder of the simplicity of human thinking. While the Xiothar worried about power, manipulation, and control, humans worried about survival. For the first time in a long while, Lyxara felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, something that stirred in her chest. Could she trust this human soldier? Could he really protect her, not just from physical threats, but from the isolation she had known for most of her life? The thought lingered in her mind as they walked together through the palace corridors, surrounded by the whispering shadows of the court. As the days passed, the tension in the palace grew. Commander Jackson Kane found himself more and more intrigued by Princess Lyxara. It wasn't just her beauty or her extraordinary abilities, though they were impossible to ignore. There was something else about her, something deeper. She was a figure trapped in a gilded cage, a prisoner of her own power and the political games that surrounded her. Despite the outward calm of the royal palace, Jackson could feel the undercurrent of danger. The Xiothar Empire, once an unstoppable force in the galaxy, was now at its weakest. And Lyxara, the last of the royal line, was the key to its future. Lyxara had always known that her position was precarious. The nobles in her court were not just her protectors, they were potential enemies, each one watching her, waiting for a chance to seize control of the throne. Her power, while extraordinary, had isolated her from the people she was supposed to lead. The nobles feared her abilities and they feared her, but they didn't respect her. They saw her as a tool to be used, not as a ruler in her own right. But Jackson was different. From the moment he stepped into her life, he had refused to treat her as just another object of political maneuvering. He treated her like a person, like an equal, and that was something Lyxara wasn't used to. She had expected him to be just like all the others, cautious, distant, respectful but cold. But Jackson's honesty had disarmed her. There was a warmth in him that made her feel seen in a way that no one else ever had. Still, Lyxara knew that she couldn't let her guard down. Her world was a dangerous one, and Jackson, despite his good intentions, was still an outsider. He might have been a soldier, but he wasn't prepared for the deadly politics that ruled her kingdom. One evening, as Sarah walked through the palace gardens, she felt the familiar weight of eyes upon her. The nobles were always watching, even when they pretended not to. She had become accustomed to the stares, to the whispers that followed her every move. But tonight something felt different. The air was charged with a quiet tension, as if the calm before a storm. Jackson was supposed to be on duty, but Sarah had requested his presence. She hadn't explained why. She wasn't sure why herself. But she needed someone she could trust, someone who didn't look at her with fear or ulterior motives. She needed to feel like she wasn't alone. As she approached a small fountain in the center of the garden, she saw him standing by the edge, his broad frame illuminated by the soft light of the nearby lanterns. His expression was serious, his eyes scanning the surroundings, but there was a sense of calm about him. He wasn't distracted by the grandness of the palace or the beauty of the gardens. He was focused, alert, and in tune with his environment in a way that few could match. "Commander," Sarah said, her voice breaking the silence. She felt the weight of his gaze as he turned to look at her. "Your Highness," Jackson replied with a slight nod. "You requested my presence," Sarah hesitated. There was something in the air tonight that made her uneasy, a feeling she couldn't quite place. It was as if the walls of the palace were closing in around her, and the long corridors were filled with whispers of betrayal. She had never been one to shy away from her own power, but in this moment she felt small, vulnerable. "I wanted to talk," she said softly. "Not about the politics or the court, but about something else." Jackson stepped closer, his expression softening. "I'm listening." She paused, unsure of how to begin. "Do you ever wonder what it's like to be free?" she asked, her voice distant. "To not have to worry about the weight of the world on your shoulders, to not have your every move watched." Jackson raised an eyebrow, considering her question carefully. He was used to being in dangerous situations, but he had never lived a life like hers. To be a princess, to be the last of a powerful dynasty, he couldn't even imagine what that would be like. And yet, there was something about Sarah that made him want to understand, to offer her something beyond duty and obligation. "Every day," he said quietly. "I've been a soldier for most of my life, and I've seen what power can do to people. It doesn't bring freedom, it brings chains." Sarah's gaze flickered over him as if she were studying him for the first time. "Do you think that's what power is? Chains?" Jackson nodded slowly. "It depends on how you use it. Some people are born with it like you, others have to fight for it. Either way, it's a weight, and it never really goes away." Sarah looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. She had never shared her feelings so openly before, not with anyone. But there was something about Jackson, something that made her feel like she could trust him. She had seen many soldiers in her life, but none of them had looked at her the way he did, not with fear, not with reverence, but with understanding. "I don't want to be a symbol," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to be just a puppet for the court to control. I want to be more than that." Jackson took a step closer, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. You already are." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "You really think that?" he nodded. "I do. You have power, yes, but you also have a heart. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of their words hanging between them. The air was thick with unspoken emotions, and Sarah felt something stir within her. A flicker of hope, a feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way out of this cage she had built around herself. But before she could say anything more, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, breaking the moment. Sarah stiffened, her mind instantly alert. She knew what that sound meant. The celestial guard was approaching. The nobles would never allow such a private moment between them. "Thank you, Jackson," she said quickly, her voice steady again, though the vulnerability had not entirely disappeared. "I think we should return to the palace." Jackson didn't argue. He simply nodded and followed her as they walked back toward the main building. the soft hum of the palace growing louder with each step. As they reached the entrance, Sarah stopped and turned to him. "Stay close," she said, her voice low. "I have a feeling tonight won't be as peaceful as it seems." Jackson gave a small smile, his eyes meeting hers. "I'll be right behind you." The moment he said those words, Sarah felt a strange sense of comfort. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel entirely alone. Maybe, just maybe, there was someone who could help her break free from the chains of her destiny. But she knew that the danger was far from over. In the palace, where power was a game played by the most ruthless, one wrong move could lead to disaster. And Sarah was about to find out just how dangerous the game truly was. The days that followed were filled with quiet tension. Sarah knew that something was wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. The palace, once a place of grandeur and peace, now felt like a powder keg waiting to explode. The whispers in the halls were growing louder, the political games more dangerous. Sarah's every move was being watched, and she couldn't help but feel trapped, like a bird in a gilded cage. Jackson remained by her side as he always did, but his presence didn't calm the storm inside her. He was a constant reminder that despite the growing danger, she was not alone, but his presence also made her question everything she knew about herself. He treated her as an equal, a person, not a princess, not a weapon. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt like someone cared for her, not for her status or her power, but for who she was. But this new feeling, this new connection, brought its own set of problems. Sarah knew that in her world, emotions were a luxury she couldn't afford. And yet, every time she looked at Jackson, she felt a tug in her chest that she couldn't ignore. The court, meanwhile, was in chaos. The factions that had long been vying for power saw Sarah's growing bond with Jackson as a threat. House Velorin, the most powerful and dangerous of the noble families, began making their move. Lord Zerk, the head of the house, had long coveted the throne, and Sarah, as the last of the royal bloodline, was the key to his ambitions. Zerk's plot to overthrow Sarah had been in motion for months, and the final stages were now being set in motion. Sarah could feel it in the air, a sense of impending disaster that seemed to grow with each passing day. The walls of the palace, once a symbol of strength and power, now felt like they were closing in around her. One evening, as the two of them walked along the palace's outer walls, Jackson spoke up, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his voice low but steady. Sarah glanced at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. She had been trying to push down the unease she felt, but it was growing harder to ignore. "I've had a lot on my mind," she replied, her voice colder than she intended. Jackson didn't respond immediately, but he didn't look away. "I know," he said after a moment, "but you don't have to carry it all alone." Sarah stopped, turning to face him. For a moment she considered pushing him away, as she had done with so many others. She had spent years building walls around herself, walls so thick that no one could get close. But Jackson wasn't like the others. His honesty, his lack of fear, cut through those walls. And despite herself, Sarah found herself reaching for him, her emotions threatening to spill over. "I don't have a choice," she said softly. "If I show weakness, they'll use it against me. If I show fear, they'll take advantage of it. This is the only way I can survive." Jackson stepped closer, his presence steady and comforting. "You don't have to do it alone, Sarah. Let me help you." The sound of footsteps approaching broke their moment, and Sarah quickly pulled away, her walls snapping back into place. "We can't afford to be seen like this," she said, her voice cold once again. "It's not safe." Jackson hesitated for a moment, but he nodded. "I'll always be here when you need me." They continued walking in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The tension in the air was palpable, like the calm before a storm. And just as she had feared, that storm broke the very next day. In the middle of the night, a cry echoed through the palace. Like Sarah awoke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. The palace was under attack. She rushed from her chambers, her mind racing. The Celestial Guard had been stationed at every entrance, but they had failed to prevent the invasion. House Veloran's soldiers had breached the outer walls of the palace. The rebellion that, like Sarah had feared, had finally begun. Jackson appeared at her side in an instant, his hand on the hilt of his weapon. "We need to move," he said urgently. Now, like Sarah didn't hesitate. She had spent her whole life training for this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the chaos that followed. The halls of the palace, once quiet and grand, were now filled with the sounds of battle. Soldiers clashed with the palace guards, and the air was thick with smoke and the scent of blood. Like Sarah's mind raced as she searched for a way out, but the palace had been sealed off from the outside. "Stay close," Jackson said, his voice steady. "We're getting you out of here." Like Sarah nodded, her eyes scanning the chaos around them. The attack was swift, but it wasn't just an assault on the palace. It was a message. House Veloran was making its move, and they were sending a clear signal that they were willing to do anything to seize control of the throne. They moved through the palace, Jackson leading the way with Sarah close behind. Despite the danger, there was a sense of calm in him, a quiet confidence that she couldn't help but admire. For a moment she allowed herself to believe that they could escape, that they could survive this night. But then, as they turned a corner, they were met by a wall of soldiers. Jackson cursed under his breath. "We're trapped." Like Sarah's heart raced as she looked around for an escape. The soldiers were closing in, their weapons raised, ready for battle. But in that moment, something inside like Sarah snapped. Her psionics flared to life, the raw power surging through her like a tidal wave. She raised her hand, and the soldiers before her froze, their movements stilled by her will. "Get them out of here," she ordered, her voice cold and commanding. Jackson didn't hesitate. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the rear of the palace, where a hidden passageway led to the underground tunnels. The soldiers in front of them moved sluggishly, their minds clouded by her influence. But like Sarah couldn't hold the power for long. She had to conserve her energy. "Go," she said urgently. "We don't have much time." Jackson nodded, his face hard with determination. They ran down the passage, the sound of footsteps echoing in the narrow tunnel. Behind them, the sounds of the battle grew fainter, but like Sarah knew it was far from over. The storm had only just begun. They emerged into the night, the cool air a stark contrast to the heat of the palace. Like Sarah could still feel the weight of the power she had used, her mind dizzy from the exertion. But there was no time to rest. The rebellion was in full force, and they had to move quickly if they were to survive. "Where do we go now?" Jackson asked, his voice low. Like Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and fear. "We fight. We fight for the future of my people." The night air was cold, but the heat of the battle still lingered in like Sarah's mind. She could hear the sounds of chaos in the distance, the clash of steel, the cries of soldiers, and the distant rumble of explosions as the palace of Xiathar was torn apart. They had escaped through the hidden tunnels, but the fight was far from over. Jackson kept a steady hand on like Sarah's shoulder as they moved swiftly through the darkened streets of the capital. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she couldn't afford to let her fear show. Her people were in danger, and she was the only one who could save them. The hidden passageway led them to an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city, far from the main streets where House Veloran's soldiers would be searching for them. Jackson helped her inside, the flickering light from the dim lanterns casting shadows on the walls. "We'll need to regroup and plan our next move," Jackson said, his voice low but firm. "They won't stop until they have you." Like Sarah nodded, though she didn't say anything. She was used to being in control, used to having all the answers. But now, in the middle of a rebellion she hadn't anticipated, She was starting to question everything she thought she knew about herself and about the future of her empire. For a moment, she let herself breathe. She could still feel the tension of the palace walls, still hear the screams of her people echoing in her mind. But she couldn't afford to dwell on that now. She needed to act. Jackson stepped away from her, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "I'll check the perimeter," he said. "Stay here and don't make a sound." Like Sarah watched him go, her mind racing. She knew that they were running out of time. The longer they stayed hidden, the more vulnerable they became. Zerk would stop at nothing to find her, and if he had his way, he would seize control of the throne. But she had made a promise to herself, to her people, that she would not let that happen. She would fight. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. She tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for the hidden blade at her side. But it was Jackson who returned, his face grim. "They're getting closer," he said, kneeling beside her. "We don't have much time. Zerk's forces will be here soon, and we need to move fast." Like Sarah stood up, her heart pounding. She was no longer the helpless princess locked away in a palace. She was the future of the Xiathar Empire, and she would fight for it. "We're going to the royal armory," she said, her voice steady, her eyes determined. "If we're going to win this, we need weapons, real weapons." Jackson didn't hesitate. He understood the gravity of her words. Without a word, he led her out of the warehouse, and the two of them moved quickly through the streets. As they made their way toward the palace, like Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. The city that had once been her home now felt like an enemy territory. Every corner, every shadow held a threat, but she was no longer afraid. When they reached the royal armory, like Sarah felt a surge of power. It was a place she had visited many times before, but always under the watchful eyes of her guards. Now, for the first time, she was here as a commander, not just a princess. Inside the armory, the weapons were carefully arranged on display. The swords were polished, the blasters charged and ready. But it wasn't the weapons that gave her strength. It was the realization that she could take control of her fate. She was no longer just a symbol. She was a leader, and her people needed her. Jackson handed her a blade, a sword designed for Xiathar warriors, long and curved, perfect for close combat. She held it in her hand, the weight of it grounding her, filling her with purpose. "We're not running anymore," she said, her voice sharp and commanding. "We're going to face them head-on." Jackson gave her a nod of approval. "I'm with you." The two of them made their way back to the palace, the sounds of the rebellion growing louder with each step. As they approached the gates, like Sarah could see the smoke rising in the distance, the fires of battle lighting up the sky. House Veloran's soldiers were everywhere, an army of mercenaries and loyalists, all marching under the banner of Lord Zerk. But like Sarah wasn't afraid. She had something Zerk didn't: unity. As they entered the palace grounds, like Sarah was struck by the sight of her people fighting for their lives. The guards, who had once been her protectors, were now fighting side by side with her. The nobles, who had once been her enemies, were rallying behind her, ready to defend their home. "Gather the forces," like Sarah shouted, her voice rising above the chaos. "We fight for Xiathar, we fight for the future." The soldiers, fueled by her words, rallied to her side. Like Sarah raised her blade, her heart beating in time with the rhythm of the battle. Her mind was focused, her purpose clear. This was her moment. She had been raised to rule, but now she would lead her people to victory. Jackson stood beside her, his weapon drawn, his eyes sharp. Together, they charged into the heart of the battle, fighting with everything they had. The soldiers of House Veloran were fierce, but they were not prepared for the power of a united Xiathar. As they fought their way through the palace, like Sarah felt the weight of her heritage bearing down on her. But she didn't falter. She had something more than bloodline on her side. She had the will to survive, and she had the loyalty of the people who believed in her. It wasn't long before they reached Lord Zerk's position. He stood at the center of his forces, a towering figure with a cruel smirk on his face. But when he saw Sarah and Jackson approach, his smirk faded, replaced by a look of disbelief. "You," Zerk spat, his voice full of contempt. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing but a girl playing at being a queen." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "I am the last of my bloodline, Zerk. I am the future of Xiathar, and I will not let you destroy it." With a swift motion, she raised her sword and charged at him, her movements precise and deadly. Zerk's soldiers tried to stop her, but she cut them down with ease. Her blade was a blur of motion, a symbol of her strength and determination. Zerk tried to raise his weapon, but Jackson was faster. He disarmed the traitor in an instant, knocking him to the ground. Sarah stood over him, her eyes filled with anger and resolve. "You've lost, Zerk. The throne isn't yours to take." With a final strike, she ended the rebellion, and the Xiathar people were free. As the dust settled and the palace grew quiet, Sarah looked around at her people. They were battered and weary, but they were united. And she knew in that moment that she had earned their respect. She wasn't just a princess anymore, she was their leader. Jackson stood beside her, his eyes filled with pride. "You did it." Sarah met his gaze, a soft smile on her lips. "We did it." Together they had saved Xiathar, and together they would rebuild. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Sarah felt like she had control of her destiny. And she would face whatever came next, not as a princess, but as a ruler who had earned her place on the throne.